Hi everyone, Tunile here and welcome to the Africa History Channel. Last episode, we explored the history of the Shona people from the 900s until the decline of the Kingdom of Zimbabwe in the mid-1400s. In this episode, we will look at its successor states until the mid-1800s when the Nguni peoples from the south invaded the region and occupied large swaths of Shona territory. Let's get started. Before we go on, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications for the channel and help us hit 10,000 subscribers. Thank you very much. The kingdoms in this area rose on taking control of the sources of the items traded over the long distance trade that went over the Indian Ocean: gold, ivory and copper. Before the late 1400s, their main international trading partners were Arabs, Arab-African mixed race peoples, and Islamized Africans from the Swahili coast, as East Africa was known then. They traded from the port of Sofala and Mozambique in the current country of Mozambique, from where they traveled to markets such as Mutapa, Sena, Tete, Luanze and Bokoto in the interiors of these Shona areas of southern Africa, between the Limpopo River to the south, the Zambezi to the north, and the Kalahari Desert to the west. As the Kingdom of Zimbabwe declined, a new kingdom, Mutapa, would rise in its place. The founder claimed to be a prince from Zimbabwe, a son of King Nyahewe Matope. He was a warrior prince known as Nyatsimba Mutota, who sought out to conquer the salt-producing areas north of Great Zimbabwe. Salt was one commodity worth its weight in gold, and he conquered the salt mines of Tavara. His son, Nyahewe Matope, would expand the kingdom to fill the vacuum left by its predecessor, taking control of the great gold mines of Mayinka and the coastal kingdoms to the west and the Tonga to the east. By 1480, 50 years from when Mutota officially founded it, Mutapa had reached its greatest extent under his son. Its kings were called Mwene Mutapa, and they were held as earthly representatives of Mwari, the great god of the Shona. From the late 1400s, the Portuguese began to arrive the area as they built up their trade from Portugal all the way to Goa in India. They would forcefully displace the Arab Swahili merchants in the coastal cities of Sofala and Mozambique, and also as the main partners of the Mutapa in international trade. For a century, they would be subject to the Mutapa, with their activities restricted to the coastal cities and the aforementioned market towns. The appointment of the Portuguese governor of Mozambique was subject to the approval of the Mwene Mutapa, and he had to pay a hefty fee for this confirmation and the right to trade. Two factors led to the fragmentation of Mutapa. First, the Mwene Mutapa delegated a lot of authority to his appointed chiefs, called Fumos. When Mwene Mutapa was strong and popular, there were no issues. But as these Fumos became more hereditary and some weaker Mwene Mutapas emerged, the Fumos began to exercise more autonomy and exploited divisions in the royal family, weakening the kingdom. Around the same time, the Portuguese had heard of the gold mines of Mayinka and were led to believe they could get gold in the same abundance the Spanish had acquired from their American possessions, if only they could possess these mines. Their first attempt to take these mines directly, led by a direct appointee of King Sebastian of Portugal called Francis Barreto, would end in failure in 1573. But as Mutapa became embroiled in dynastic struggles, different factions began to invite external parties to support their claims. Some invited the Portuguese, while others invited the new rising power amongst the Shona, the Rozvi Empire. Alternating puppet Mwene Mutapas occupied the throne until 1759, when the most devastating of the civil wars occurred, after which the kingdom was reduced to a small chiefdom on the fringes of the Rozvi. The Rozvi arose from the easternmost of the Fumo or chieftains of the Mutapa, the area called Guruhuswa, under the title of Shangimere, bestowed upon them by the Mwene Mutapa. As Mutapa faltered through the 1600s, the Shangimere began to build up their power. They first conquered the Butwa, the other much smaller states that broke out from Great Zimbabwe at the same time Mutapa broke out in 1430, taking their great stone capital of Kami in the early 1660s. The name of the Rozvi ruler who achieved this and who is acknowledged as the founder of the Rozvi Empire was Shangimere Dombo. From 1629, the Mwene Mutapa had been a puppet of the Portuguese who maintained a garrison in the capital. Upon seeing Dombo's success in Butua, a faction in Mutapa reached out to him and invited him to expel the Portuguese. He was only too glad to oblige and was successful at pushing the Portuguese out of Mutapa, installing a Mwene Mutapa who was now a Rozvi puppet, reversing the roles between Mutapa and Rozvi. Shangimiri Dombo and his son and successor, Kamgun Dombo, took control of the key locations of the Mayinka gold mines, the salt fields of Tavara, and most of the area that covers present-day Zimbabwe, parts of western Botswana, northern tip of South Africa, and eastern Mozambique. Many years before Shaka made the cow's horn formation popular in the more southern parts of Africa in the Zulu conquests, Rozvi already adopted a similar military tactic in its battles, making them formidable enemies for the Portuguese. While the Rozvi remained strong, Portuguese influence in the area was restricted, and they went back and forth in the control of the now symbolic occupier of the Mutapa throne. However, Rozvi control over these areas followed the Mutapa model and was loose. In time, Rozvi would face the same problems of internal divisions as the power of regional chiefs, bolstered with proceeds of trade with the Portuguese, grew. Over time, Rozvi would experience multiple invasions from different African and European sources, including the Dutch Boers, Mpanga, Ngwana, Maseko, and Zwangendaba, and those invasions will be repelled, but at great cost to the empire. Two major droughts in the area, first from 1795 to 1800 and then from 1824 to 1829, both weakened the Rozvi and also contributed to making the nature of warfare in the area even more desperate. It was around this time that Shaka's conquests began to the south. This precipitated the Mfekani, translated to mean the Great Crushing, during which those from the south who were conquered by Shaka fled northwards and used the methods with which Shaka conquered them to fight those who they met, triggering new waves of migrations. It was one such invasion of a Rozvi, weakened by previous invasions and droughts, in 1831 by the Swazi Queen Nyamazana, that saw the defeat of the Rozvi army under Shangimere Krisamuru and the sacking of the Rozvi capital. Krisamiru's son, Shangimere Toachipi Zareri, took the throne in 1831 and tried to put together his kingdom after the Swazi Queen departed. However, a new invader who would not go away was about to enter Shona land. Mzilikazi, a general of Shaka himself, had fled his master and was in search of new lands to settle his people. After suffering great losses to the Boers in 1836, Mzilikazi took his army across the Limpopo River and crossed into Rozvi territory in 1838. By 1840, he had subjugated the area, the first non-Shona to rule this area in nearly 1,000 years. Mzilikazi and his followers were Nguni, and the tribe came to be known as the Ndebele. Shangimere Toachipi would continue a guerrilla war against the Ndebele for 26 years until his capture in 1866. Uncharacteristically, Mzilikazi let him leave, perhaps out of respect for the great power of the Shona and how they had managed to keep Europeans at bay in the area, something even Mzilikazi had been unable to do in the south. Shangimere Toachipi will die in 1873, the last of the great Shona kings, and will be buried as his ancestors had been, inside the heart of a hill, the Mavangwe Hills, which is now a protected national monument in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. Join us in the next episode as we explore the history in some other area of the African continent from the perspective of Africans themselves. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe as we journey to 10,000 subscribers.